many times in your life do you think you've drawn up a budget and then not stuck to it? The reason traditional budgets don't work and people burn out and feel exhausted and restricted, the same reasons why diets always fail. Budgeting and dieting evoke a really similar emotional response. And for a lot of people, both food and money come packaged in this like guilty scarcity mindset that's all wrapped up with anxiety. Welcome back to Money by Majella, your place for a drink and think on all things personal finance, becoming financially free together. Okay, so my very first and the most important tip is to look at budgeting differently. Budgeting to me is intentional spending. It's permission to spend, and it's setting up a realistic action plan to get to your dream life. You're not starting a new money diet. You're not about to go into a restrictive lifestyle. You're making an action plan to live out your dream life, to be financially free and to never have money anxiety again. This is exciting. So let's treat it as such. Take yourself out, sit in a cozy cafe, drinking a really tasty mocha or a caramel milkshake, or grab yourself a bottle of wine, put on some jazzy tunes on a Friday night, light some candles. You're about to change your life. Let's go. First, I have a few basic guiding principles that I like to keep in the forefront of my mind when I'm doing my budget. The first one is to be realistic, not idealistic. So you're trying to create a budget that will fit into your lifestyle. You're not trying to cram your lifestyle into a tiny restrictive budget. Research shows that the most motivating thing is progress, and so then the opposite is probably true, that the most demotivating thing is setbacks. And so you want to make sure that you're setting up a budget that you can consistently adhere to. What's the point of creating a super restrictive budget that consumes all of your life and stops you from living your life, to then only burn out and dip into your savings and use your savings anyway? Simple and stress-free. This is my mantra when it comes to all things money. Simple and stress-free. Automate it where you can, make it as clear as possible. The easier that you make it, the easier it's going to be to follow, to stay consistent, to see progress, to get momentum, and to reach financial freedom. And finally, it's to know your why. Really come up with a clear vision of your dream life, and then you can always come back to this if ever you're struggling. So now that we've got the principles, we're going to look at the practical steps, and I'm going to break this down into 6 easy steps. We're going to look at your income, past expenses, bare bone expenses, savings, discretionary expenses, and then the split. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is make a list of all of your different income sources. Where is your income coming from? How often are you getting it? And how much are you getting? The second thing to do is to look at your past expenses. Like I said, your budget needs to be realistic, not idealistic. And so we're going to actually base your budget off your personal spending habits. It's always better to allow yourself permission to spend and to ease yourself into a budget. Otherwise, it's like saying, I'm just going to cut out all carbs and exercise every day for the next 3 months. Like, the likelihood of you succeeding at that is so slim. So we're going to take it one step at a time and really make sure that it's fitting into your life. So once you've downloaded your spreadsheet that you'll be able to download from the banks, you can collate all of the data and start to categorize your spending. So I'll give you a list of the categories that you use. Yours might vary slightly, but use this as a guide. So we've got rent or mortgage, transport, which is like petrol or train tickets or parking, anything like that. Groceries, bills, which includes like utilities, phone bill, gym membership, car rego, health insurance. And then we've got gifts, so like birthday presents or wedding gifts, things like that. Clothes, cosmetics like haircuts or skincare. And then we've got like a buffer category, and so this is sort of like miscellaneous, like one-offs, like if you need to buy a pillow or a light bulb. Fun, which is like your guilt-free spending, hanging out with friends, going out, and charity. Just keep in mind that some of these expenses won't come up in your 3 months of expenses because they're only charged like quarterly or 6 monthly or yearly. And so you need to work out roughly how much that would be per pay period. So now that you've got your categories, you can work out like how much you spend in each of those categories. And you can work out roughly how much that is per month or per pay period. Now, some of these expenses are going to be fixed and some are going to be discretionary. For this next step, we're just going to focus on the fixed amounts. Right now, we're going to look at our bare bone expenses, our fixed expenses. These include things like our rent or mortgage, our bills, our transport costs, our groceries, and our gifts. So right now, some of your income will have been accounted for by your fixed bare bone expenses. So moving forward, we will work with the leftover income. So the amount that's left over once your bare bone expenses has been subtracted. And first, we're going to look at our savings, not our other discretionary expenses. We're going to really focus on trying to pay our future self first and get our future self ahead. You're going to want to decide what you're saving for. It's better to have intentionality and a purpose assigned to your savings rather than just putting a bunch of funds into a general savings account. I have 3 different types of savings accounts. One, an investment fund, which is money going towards an investment property or the stock market. Then I have an emergency fund, which is used for dramatic emergencies, any drastic change in income, and really big expenses that I didn't foresee. And then I have my Smile account, and this is for any like holidays or big expensive items that aren't necessary but they make me smile. The way I personally allocate my savings is I first put everything towards my emergency fund, and then once that's built, then I look at doing my investments and my Smile. And so I'll put majority of my savings into my investments and then some of it into my Smile. So I might put like 50% into my investing and 15% into my Smile. What's important to note is that it's always better to start with a lower percentage. So if you think you can only handle like 10 to 20%, that's totally fine. That's a good figure to start with. I personally started with 10%, and then I was able to incrementally increase that, and eventually I was putting aside 60 to 70% of my income. At one stage I was putting aside 75%. It's definitely better to start with a lower percentage and then incrementally increase it once you start seeing consistency and progress. Okay, so now we're going to look at our discretionary expenses. So these are like your clothes, your cosmetics, your Christmas fund, your charity fund, your buffer account, and your fun account. These are expenses that are necessary, that you definitely want to account for, but at the same time they're variable and they're a little bit discretionary. And so percentages work really well because they're expenses that it doesn't really matter if the allocated fund drops a little bit, if your income drops, or if we earn more, it doesn't really matter if it increases. Just keeping in mind that if your income changes drastically, then you will definitely need to revisit these percentages and readjust. Okay, so let's just pause a minute and have a look at what each of these funds are actually going to be used for, and this might help you decide what percentage you want to allocate to each of them. Now, I consider each of these expenses necessary, like I mentioned, and I've included my fun guilt-free spending in there because to me that is necessary. That's a necessary thing that we need to budget for. And the reason why is that I really value consistency, and for something to be consistent, it needs to be easy and realistic. We all like to think that we can just cut something out of our lives in order to save money, and a lot of the time we try and cut socializing, but it's not realistic, and at the end of the day we need human connection in order to enjoy life and thrive in life. And so if you really want to save money, maybe you can try and cut back the amount you're spending out with friends and socializing, but I definitely recommend at the beginning just budgeting for what you normally spend and doing that for a few months and then coming back and revisiting the amount that you've designated. Your clothes account. Again, this is something that people often say, like, I'm saving money, I'm not going to buy any clothes. But the reality of the situation is that your body fluctuates and clothes wear out, they get old, and you need to buy new ones. And so let's just account for it. Let's accept it. Let's put it into the budget so that it's not stressful when it comes to the time when you need new clothes. Even if you say, I'm only going to buy clothes from a thrift store, that still is going to cost money. So So let's just account for that in our budget. Same goes for cosmetics, haircuts, skincare. They're things that we need, and so instead of trying to restrict ourselves, let's just account for it in advance. I have a whole category for Christmas time because for me personally, Christmas time, summertime, that's a super busy time of year when we're all socializing, there's heaps more events, there's a lot of gifts you need to buy, there's just a lot going on. And so I often find that around Christmas time, I'm running out of money, and I used to have to dip into my savings a lot. And so I created a Christmas account so that throughout the year I can just put a really tiny amount. I only put about 1 to 2% in there, and it just means that I am putting money towards that so that come that time of year, I know that I can afford it without having to worry about dipping into my savings. I also have a buffer category, and again, this is just a really small percentage that I put aside for any expenses that I may have missed in categorizing. Expenses that are kind of like a bit random, that don't really fit. They're more like miscellaneous expenses that are kind of one-off, like buying a pillow, buying a light bulb, phone charger, things that you couldn't foresee, you didn't account for, but they're not an emergency. I also put money aside every pay period for charity, and this is something personal that I like to do. If this is something that you want to do, 10% is a good measure, but it's totally dependent on your unique situation and what you can afford. And so as you can see, like, there really is an element of discretion for each of these categories, these discretionary expenses. When you're deciding on your percentage, it's really up to you, and it really depends on how much you think you're going to be spending based on your previous habits. And so you need to prioritize, you need to be realistic, and you need to choose a percentage that is going to reflect your actual spending habits. At the end of the day, don't stress if you are over budgeting or under budgeting for these expenses. You can always come back and readjust. Okay, you've done all of the hard work now. You've looked at your past expenses, you've worked out the categories, you've worked out how much you're spending in each of the categories, you've worked out how much you want to save and what you want to save for, and you've worked out your discretionary expenses. You're doing good. There's only one more step that you need to take, and that is probably the easiest step, but it is the most fidgety step. So this is called the split. Now, I've created a spreadsheet so that it's quite easy for you. So you put your income in, and then the Excel spreadsheet will calculate it and do all of the work for you, so that then you know exactly where to put all of your money. Now, the fidgety part is setting up all of your different bank accounts for each of your categories. Yes, I mean having a separate bank account for each and every category. It may seem excessive, but trust me, it is definitely the most simple and effective way of doing this. The reason why is that you can at a glance really quickly and easily see how much money you have for each thing. So for example, if I open up my bank account right now, I can see I have $20 left for my groceries until the next pay period. There's no room for confusion, or you don't have to sit there and do the calculation in your head. You don't have to track as you go and say, oh, okay, in my everyday account I have $400, but I've already spent $100 on groceries, and I budgeted $150, so that means I have $50 left. Like, there's none of that in your head maths that you have to do. It's just all there, it's all tracked for you. So that's why I am a huge advocate for having separate bank accounts for each of your categories. Opening up your bank accounts should be quite easy depending on what bank you're with. Sometimes you can do it directly on the app, and sometimes you need to do it on the net bank version, like the web browser version, but it's pretty easy. And there's a really intentional for your bank accounts. Literally, your next step is get paid and then watch the system work its magic. If you found this video valuable, please give it a thumbs up, give us some love. That would be amazing. It really helps out the channel, so I appreciate it so much. Let me know in the comments how you go with your budgeting. If you need any help with the spreadsheet, just comment below, I will help you out. But that's all for now. Good luck with your budgeting, and I'll chat to you next week.